From one fantasy franchise that started with Sean Connery to another, which is what I originally wrote when this review was meant to follow Highlander 2, but then I moved Jaws 3D to that spot, but screw it, I'm not cutting that line. Today, we'll see how a film series that started out strong, but then would move on to the straight-to-video market fared in the long term. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a new beginning.
By all the stars in heaven, I will have that heart tonight!
Dragonheart, a new beginning.
Slaying dragons is a Western concept. In the East, they are sacred, divine creatures who brought wisdom, strength, even redemption.
That clip from King of the Monsters has some truth to it when you look at the history of dragons in Western media before around the mid-1990s. Dragons were almost always antagonistic creatures that represented a great challenge a hero would have to overcome in their adventures, and more often than not would end up being slain by our valiant hero. This is a trope used in ancient legends, literature, films, both live action and animated, television, and eventually gaming. And despite the quote I used earlier, even Eastern culture has been prone to using dragons in their entertainment to represent great evil. There are of course some exceptions prior to the mid-90s, the two most well known probably being Falkor from The Neverending Story, designed to resemble a Chinese depiction of a dragon, and Elliot from Disney's Pete's Dragon. There's also Ollie from Stanley's Dragon, but that's not really a major well-known exception. I'm just wondering if anyone's ever seen that movie. I rented it like twice when I was a kid on VHS, and yet somehow it's so ingrained in my memory I can remember it vividly. It felt like there was a major turning point, however, in May of 1996 when Dragonheart released in the theaters. Produced by Rafaela de Laurentiis and based on a story by Charles Edward Pogue and Patrick Reed Johnson, the film was directed by Rob Cohen, who was most known at the time for the biographical film Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. The movie was about a knight named Bowen, played by Dennis Quaid, seeking vengeance on a dragon for assumingly corrupting the heart of his former student turned tyrannical King Einan, David Thewlis's character. Bowen slays every existing dragon until only one remains, that being Draco, voiced by the legendary Sean Connery. But shortly after meeting this Draco, Bowen learns this dragon is incredibly noble and dare I even say benevolent.
That's all that's left of the last dragon slayer who tangled with me!
Okay, well at the very least he's noble. Realizing that Einan has always had darkness inside him, Bowen teams up with Draco, a poor woman named Kara who has her own bone to pick with the king, played by Dina Meyer, and Brother Gilbert, a poetic monk who serves as a lot of the comedic relief of the film, as portrayed by Pete Postlethwaite. Dragonheart, although definitely flawed in some aspects, is a great fantasy movie and one I love a lot. The characters are all played excellently by the respected actors, and there's a real charm to their interactions with one another. The action is fun and paced out properly, with David Egby's cinematography complementing much of the action very well. The comedy works for the most part, and the visual effects are more often than not pretty impressive for the mid-90s. Sure, there are times when the uncanny valley rears its ugly head with Draco.
I don't want to see your ugly mug around here ever again.
But most of the time I think the CGI holds up pretty well, especially compared to other 90s CGI movies.
Horror. Horror.
And of course, Randy Edelman's score for the movie is fantastic, notably the main title theme, which has gone on to appear in a lot of non-Dragonheart media. And finally, as cheesy as it sounds, this is one of those movies that gets me every time with the ending, just like it did when I first saw it as a kid. Dragonheart got somewhat mixed reviews at the time, but has since grown a cult following, and these days it's often seen as a true classic of the genre. The movie made pretty decent profit at the box office, so it's no surprise that a sequel did eventually come. However, perhaps because the movie wasn't a runaway hit like, say, Universal's other CGI-heavy reptile movie, the next installment would forego its theatrical release and go straight to video with a budget to match that status.
Okay, that's not good!
4 years after the original film, Universal released Dragonheart: A New Beginning, with producer Rafaela de Laurentiis returning and directing reins being handed over to Doug Leffler, who had mostly television credits to his name directing-wise, and with a story written by Sherry Goodharts. I'm gonna be upfront why I originally chose Dragonheart 2 for my second episode of Combo Breaker. Firstly, and most obviously, as referenced in the opening, both Highlander and Dragonheart are franchises that had Sean Connery in the original installments.
Now, Draco. Without you, what do we do? Where do we turn?
Who knows, Highlander? Who knows?
But secondly, these two sequels back to back gave a good indication of the variety of sequel qualities we'll be discussing. You see, I don't think Dragonheart A New Beginning is a terrible movie, certainly not even close to Highlander 2 or Jaws 3 levels of bad. It's just kind of underwhelming and a bit boring. Just enough so to count it as a combo breaker for the franchise. The movie is set many years after the original and begins with a prologue showing that right before his passing of old age, Sir Bowen, played this time by not Dennis Quaid, found a dragon egg in Draco's old cave, meaning the dragon race did not die with him. Bowen gave the egg to a bunch of monks to care for in a monastery, and the dragon eventually hatches and is named Drake. Several more years pass, and that's where we meet one of our main protagonists, a stable boy named Geoff, played by Christopher Masterson, who most of you will all know as Francis from Malcolm in the Middle. Geoff has the dream of becoming a knight because of course he does. It's a medieval movie. The protagonist either has to be a knight or is actively trying to be one.
Daring today, aren't we?
Geoff one day stumbles across the dragon and the two quickly become friends and help one another with their goals. Geoff obviously trying to become a knight, and Drake learning to hone in on his dragon abilities. Joining them in their teachings is Matt Hickey's character Mansel, who is put in charge of Drake, and two Chinese travelers, Master Kwan and Lian, played by Henrio and Rona Figueroa, respectively. I am so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Who are here to make sure Drake is not corrupted by a comet passing Earth, fabled to lead to an evil dragon bringing humanity's doom. All the while this is occurring, an advisor to the king named Osric has taken a keen interest in Drake and slowly passes new laws increasing his control of the kingdom.
Everybody got that?
The writing of the movie really isn't too bad. It's a fairly standard setup, but then so is the original, and there's no major contradictions this movie makes with what was established in the original or significant plot holes for the sequel's own writing, with two outliers. First off, Draco says numerous times in the original that he is the last dragon. It's something that he is incredibly sure of.
Hardly. But if you win, you'll be out of work.
I will not stop until I've rid the world of every last one of you.
I am the last one.
And yet, here's this egg. Now, it would be one thing if this egg was found anywhere else and they could just say Draco didn't know, but it was found in his old home.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
You could argue that he wanted to keep it secret for its own safety, but I feel like with how much he trusted Bowen at the end of the original, he would have told him. It doesn't bother me too much, but it's just worth noting. Secondly, if this amulet with the dragon's heart inside it is such a scary thing for Master Kwan and Lian, why don't they
Destroy it!
Doing that would ensure Drake wouldn't be able to be corrupted by it and turn evil. Okay, so maybe they wanted to test him with it anyways, just to see if there was any evil inside Drake already without the comet. Fair enough. But then why don't they destroy it immediately after? And it's not like destroying it would cause any major issues. Lian literally tries to do it near the end of the film after it's already too late, so clearly it's something that probably can be done. But outside of the questionable plot moments in terms of continuity and logic, where this movie really suffers writing-wise is just that it's boring. You get some interesting story stuff near the beginning and near the very end, but everything else for the most part between those 2 points just isn't that interesting. It doesn't feel like any interesting plot revelations occur, there's hardly any action, and there's not even really any stakes until the very end. It makes rewatching this movie very tedious, like most of it's watching filler episodes in some medieval television series. It doesn't help that the writing takes a turn for the more comedic and childish. The original Dragonheart truly feels like a movie for any age group. It wasn't too serious or violent that parents should feel caution to show it to their children, but it wasn't so pandering that a grown adult could watch it alone and appreciate it. The sequel, however, feels very much more geared towards the children, especially with its toning down of the violence and the humor taking a turn.
I never saw such rotten crap in my life.
Outside of Old Man Bowen's cameo at the beginning of the film, and some other passing mentions of certain characters, the film doesn't have any returning stars from the original Dragonheart, and the cast is completely made up of newbies. Geoff is a pretty generic protagonist. As I joked before, he has a super original goal in medieval fiction of becoming a knight, and yet paradoxically, they try to give him the bad boy, I don't want to conform attitude.
Dad, I know what you're gonna say, and believe me, I totally agree with you. There is no excuse for what I did. It was idiotic, immature, totally reckless, and I'm really sorry.
He doesn't really go through any significant changes in the film, despite how hard the movie tries to make us think he does. The only quote-unquote bit of development is essentially not to be a dick to Drake and be more considerate to his feelings of being alone, I guess. But the only reason I can see that as his character arc is because the movie literally spells it out to us without really showing actual signs of change. Christopher Masterson isn't a bad actor by any means, and I think his performance is fine. It's just the character is so disinteresting that I find it hard to say anything about him other than, yeah, he's the protagonist and kind of a jerk until he's not, I guess. Hell, even the moment in the movie where Drake should have vouched for Geoff over the antagonist because they're buddies, Drake's reasoning seemed to be more about what Osric did and not Geoff's changes to explain why Drake doesn't pull a turncoat.
If it wasn't for Geoff, I would have given you my heart and lost my soul.
Our new dragon replacing Draco is of course Drake, who is voiced by Robbie Benson, aka Beast from Beauty and the Beast. Drake is a big dweeb, which at times does kind of have an appeal to it, and I do appreciate that they didn't just go for the Draco personality a second time, but the performance itself is so awkward. Robbie whispers a vast majority of his lines, and he has the same cadence in his speech for almost every line delivery no matter what circumstances the character is in. Robbie is a great voice actor, so I have to chalk this up to his direction, so it's kind of the inverse of Geoff's issues, written fairly decent but the performance isn't great. No offense to the respected actor in the role, but Mansel is a character that probably should have been completely written out of the film. He's meant to serve as the comedic relief in a similar manner as Brother Gilbert, but he just doesn't have any of the charm, and really outside of bad jokes, he doesn't serve any purpose in the movie.
Did you know your son is a girl?
That's not funny. That's not funny at all.
If they really wanted a monk character to be responsible for Drake, they should have just kept Friar Peter alive in the script. I think Master Kwan and Lian are definitely several cuts above Geoff and Drake. They have a nice mentor and student dynamic. A lot of the times they're on screen is when we actually get some of the more interesting plot developments. They're involved in the better fight scenes of the movie, and seeing the regret and particularly Lian's reluctance at doing what must be done if Drake turns evil, and her inner conflict of being part of a dragon-slaying legacy, provides some actual interesting character dynamics. It honestly does kind of feel like they should have been the actual leads over Geoff, but they're still pretty good in their supporting roles. I think Lord Osric, played by Harry Van Gorkum, who also played Old Man Bowen in the opening, has a lot going for him as an antagonist and is a big step up actually from Einan from the last film, who just came off as whiny. Yeah, this movie actually did something better than the original. It surprised me too. Getting one of the negatives out of the way first, it seems like the movie kinda wants us to be surprised when he turns out to not be on the level and actually is corrupt, but there's far too many cues for the audience to see for it to really surprise anyone. However, that being said, I think that they frame him in-universe as being cunning enough that it's actually kind of believable that he tricked the commoners into thinking he's not that bad of a guy. When he presents some of the more oppressive laws to the people, he always words it in a way that doesn't sound that bad at first, and it's not until his knights actually enforce the laws later on that we see how bad they are.
Everyone should share in our kingdom's bounty. Tomorrow, I shall bestow a personal gift on all men, women, and children in the land.
And from this day forward, only the words of truth will be spoken in our kingdom.
7 lashes for the tunic, and 10 for the lies.
I love democracy.
That's just really good manipulation on his part. Ditto with how he speaks and acts around both Geoff and Drake, earning their trust and even potential friendship very quickly, and I genuinely think his plot to get Drake's heart was kinda great. Now the first twist, him being a baddie, was not surprising, but I could actually see how his second twist was shocking to some. See, Osric was not always human. He used to be a dragon named Griffin, and although it's never outright stated, context clues kinda makes it sound like he was at one point not a dickhead. But all that changed when one day some knight in a misguided fit of rage and vengeance decided to genocide the entire dragon species just to get to one dragon he held a grudge for.
That'll do it.
Griffin, now reasonably pissed off himself, attempts to accept humanity's call for war, but before he can wage his
campaign against the humans,
the other dragons, who were more content with just being reactionary and defensive, considered Griffin's desire to make humanity pay evil, and they take his heart from him, which instead of killing him somehow makes him human, and lucky for him, many years later, after he's established himself as basically the new law of this kingdom, Master Kwan brings his old heart right back to him. I love seeing more repercussions from Bowen's actions, since not only did he wipe out all the dragons essentially, but in doing so caused another issue by inadvertently creating a radicalist. But this leads to the second issue with the character, and that is once he returns to his dragon form, there's only like 5 minutes of the film left, and the movie doesn't really lean in enough to his actual motivation. The way his backstory was written suggests a degree of pathos and tragedy of his nearly extinct species, but the character still kinda just comes off as greedy and power-hungry. If his reveal of being a dragon was at the end of the second act instead, and the heroes had to deal with him as a dragon for the entire third act of the movie, and the movie actually fully committed to his more tragic backstory, I think he could have been a fantastic villain. But his puppet master manipulation tactics and interesting backstory still makes him a pretty good and, in my opinion, the best antagonist in the Dragonheart franchise. The characters in this film are definitely a mixed bag. I just couldn't get invested in our two main leads, or the comedic relief for that matter, but I did actually find the mentor characters and the antagonist kind of interesting, and their inclusions in the film actually improves it just a bit. As said before, the movie is kind of a drag to watch, and a lot of that has to do with the pacing. The movie puts all the important aspects of the film right at the beginning and right at the end of the movie. And in the time frame between, we only get basically 2 or 3 action sequences, only one of which is significantly long, although not particularly well choreographed. I don't know how much this could have been fixed in the editing room, since a lot of the pacing issues can be traced back to how the movie was fundamentally written, but I do feel like if some scenes were cut, certain scenes made longer, and maybe even commit to some minor reshoots, the movie could have been made more bearable in post-production. Buzz Feichen's IV handled the cinematography of this film, and I'll be honest, at its best it just looks passable, but at times this film visually looks only a couple of steps above a Disney Channel original movie from somewhere around the same time. But Buzz would go on to work on episodes of the masterpiece that is Young Sheldon, so we know he mastered his craft later on. The special effects are also at times just fine, albeit clearly not as good as the original. However, much like the original, there are plenty of times that the Uncanny Valley returns with a vengeance.
You're one ugly motherfucker.
Dragonheart 2 had a notably smaller budget than the original, so it couldn't be helped that there was a downgrade in that department, and if this is the best they could have made the film look, honestly, it's fine. Mark McKenzie's score for Dragonheart 2 is pretty in line with several other aspects of the film, that meaning it's underwhelming. None of it is particularly notable, let alone memorable, with the exception being when they reused the Dragonheart 1 theme. McKenzie would go on to score the next 3 installments in the franchise, and I will say I think he greatly improved with those movies. Dragonheart A New Beginning is not a painful movie to watch like other movie sequels can be. It doesn't mess with the franchise rules or traits, so it can't really be described as a betrayal. And just looking at it in a vacuum, it's far from a terribly made movie. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if someone sounded off that they actually liked the movie quite a bit. I could see how some would consider it an alright sequel. But a lot of the characters being uninteresting, and a boring plot really drags the film down to being below average for me personally. I don't have any concrete sales numbers, but I could guess, considering that it took 15 years for the next installment to happen, that it didn't do as well as Universal wanted in the home media market. Its less enthusiastic reviews probably did not help either. And of course, this combo of potential low sales and poor critical reception, it goes without saying the next installments would all be straight-to-video releases as well. Since 2015, Universal has released 3 prequels to the original Dragonheart, with Raffaello De Laurentiis returning to produce all 3, and I'll be honest, I skipped out on the first 2 for several years, figuring they wouldn't be great based on preconceived notions of straight-to-video sequels not being the beacon of quality. But when I heard about the 3rd prequel, Vengeance, was about to release, I decided to finally bite the bullet and check them out, simply out of pure curiosity, and frankly, I was pleasantly surprised. Dragonheart 3: The Sorcerer's Curse was directed by Colin Teague, another director known mostly for television, and explores the origin of how the dragons came to Earth. The story and characters were surprisingly good, it had some fun action sequences that were paced out throughout the film well enough, and the CGI for the dragon, creatively named Drago this time around, voiced by the excellent Ben Kingsley, was what really surprised me. For straight-to-video production, Drago looks really good, and it's actually one of the best instances of CGI in a straight-to-DVD feature, at least as far as I've seen. This was actually fairly competent and fun prequel. 2 years later, Norwegian director Patrick Severson helmed Dragonheart: Battle for the Heartfire, which followed up Dragonheart 3 directly, this time with the focus shifting to the grandchildren of the last film's 2 leads, and with Drago this time being voiced by the equally excellent Patrick Stewart. I do think this one was a slight step down from 3 with slightly worse action and CG, but I still quite enjoyed it. The story and some of the characters were what won me over. Even if it was a small decrease in quality from the last film, it's still a good enough film for me. The latest film in the series, Dragonheart Vengeance, was directed by Ivan Silverstrini and served as a loose sequel to the previous 2 installments, but for the most part feels more like a standalone film. This time with the always great Helena Bonham Carter voicing the new dragon Sivith. I actually think this is my personal favorite of the Dragonheart follow-ups. I don't want to get into the many reasons why, but a big one is that this movie really doubles down on a theme present in the first 2 movies. This time around, however, they made it the crux of the plot, even making that theme the movie's subtitle, Vengeance. In both Dragonheart and Dragonheart A New Beginning, we see characters who in their pursuit of revenge make grave mistakes they go on to regret. For Bowen, it was the near extinction of the dragons, and Griffin, it is both his exile in human form, and when he seeks vengeance beyond that, his own demise. In Dragonheart Vengeance, the entire theme is essentially why the act of seeking revenge can be self-destructive both physically and spiritually. I might actually do a video on this film in the future just to go in depth why I actually really like it a lot, because I do think it's a damn good movie for a straight-to-DVD prequel. Just to be clear, these recent Dragonheart films just discussed aren't amazing movies that will blow you away, and definitely not quite as good as the original, but I do find them to be pretty good and personally welcome them as installments to the franchise. According to writer Matthew Feishens, who wrote all 3 of the recent Dragonheart prequels, a 6th movie is being currently brainstormed and potentially even a television series. Or at the very least, he said that he would like to write a series, which, and this is 100% speculation on my part, perhaps Universal will greenlight a show to pad out their Peacock original lineup. And if future movies continue to be on the cheaper side and they keep making profit, I do think we'll keep getting them. There's also been talks on and off again about a potential reboot of the franchise, and even though it might not happen soon, I do think a Dragonheart reboot is one of those inevitable projects. And personally, I'm optimistic for the future of this franchise no matter what direction it goes, whether that be more straight-to-video prequels, a television series, or a proper big-budget remake. Rewatching all the films for this video really has solidified this franchise as one I love a lot, and I think it has more potential just waiting to be uncovered. In the meantime, there's only one place for us to look.
To the stars, Bowen. To the stars.
Of terror is over. I, circumference of a circle, shall fight you to the death.
Oh, get over thyself.
Hey, you don't sound like Sean Connery.
Yeah, you don't sound like Jerry Lee Lewis.
Thank you for watching episode 3 of Combo Breaker Reviews. Today's viewer question is pretty simple. What's your favorite dragon? And it could be from any medium, from legends, novels, comics, video games, television, films, etc. I hope you'll have a good day and be safe out there.